Okay.
Oh.
Looks like we're on time. How's everyone doing? Hello? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I can't hear anybody here. Let's see.
It seems that Mark can't hear us.
Yeah, I can hear him.
Yeah, me too. Well, the tyranny of chat platforms and video calls.
Oh, did he go? No. He did go. Ah, Bron did wake up.
Hi, Bron.
Hello.
Hello.
Mark, do you hear us now?
You don't appear to be sending sound, Mark.
And he doesn't hear us, I think.
Oh, yep. Or maybe I just didn't have my sound working.
No, he's not. Mark has a problem.
Yep. Do you need to click the microphone button? Should be the one on the most right-hand side of the options at the top. You seem to be sending video and screen, but not sound.
There he is.
Yep.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yep.
We hear you.
Can hear you now.
Can you hear us?
Okay. So
Good.
I guess you can hear me, but I can't hear you. That's pretty amazing.
There's also an audio button, I think. Maybe.
What I'm going to do, Brian, since you can hear me, right? I'm going to quick mail you these slides so that you have them. And if I have to go away and come back, so be it. So let me quick do that. And that way I'll be out of the way. And not a barrier to getting things done here.
I should be able to see them in Data Tracker as well.
Okay, those should be on the way to you. Let me go away and come back. You should have the slides in your inbox. I'll stop sharing them Also, I will send you a copy of Karsten's slides as well. And then I'll go away and come back. I was, and I still am, I see, recording the session. So we don't really need a traditional note taker, just someone to sort of record the big decisions, I think. All right. So like I said, let me go away and I will come back.
All right. Well, I'll give a moment.
So on a side topic, in my position as an OASIS liaison, I just received an email to suggest I look at a new standard that they're dealing with. Extension for temporal data, which has embedded in it the representation of date and time.
Right.
Without any extensions.
And is it worth talking to them about this?
I think it might be. They have no reference to any other date-time standard. They simply defined what looks a bit like existing standards right within the ABNF for their protocol.
Is that any different from the temporal work that we have been looking at?
Yeah, this is some process for querying temporal data. So I mean, I have some questions about the whole idea anyway, but why not just attach it to calendar stuff that's predefined and pre-existing and works, but basically they've redefined the entire calendar world, I think, in one spec.
All right, I have the slides back up using the built-in sharing system. So I guess while we're waiting around here, I might as well start with the note. Welcome everybody. I think from the list of names I see here that everyone has been involved in these meetings before or been involved in IETF before, but just as a reminder, everything that happens in this meeting, it is an IETF meeting. It is covered under the IETF's note. So you have a bunch of responsibilities. If you choose to make any contributions, they are covered under the copyright and patents participation rules here. And of course, there are also the anti-harassment code of conduct. So please behave well and be kind to each other and all these nice things. Moving along briefly to the rest of this, we've been more aware recently about working well with each other and making sure your contributions progress the work rather than attack people. So I won't spend too long on this, but let's be good. Basically, we're going to start just with a brief agenda bashing, see if there's anything anyone wants to add, and then I'll hand over to Karsten to present from there. So does anybody have anything you want to add to the agenda or any changes to make? Hop in now if you want. I'm just going to slap together a new CodeMD document and I will paste a link to it in here. I'm not quite sure how you get a nice URL in CodeMD if you just type something in. Anyway, I have created this one and I'll paste it in the chat. So feel free to hop in there if you want to add anything. All right. So some links, some people, of which we appear to be back down to one chair at the moment. And Francesca said she couldn't make it here, I think, but she's quite happy to look at any notes, anything.
A pointer to the notes that we are supposed to use in the chat.
Yep. Aha. I will move us over to there then. Apologies for the other thing. Where did you find that?
If you go into data tracker /meeting/upcoming, then you see a list of interims that are going on. And if you type on the
And it's
icon
there.
that looks like a piece of paper with a pen on it, that's the
Yep.
notepad.
I see now there are some tiny little icons because I went in data tracker to the SEDATE working group meetings and then clicked on the meeting from there, and there are some tiny icons up the top, very small and unassuming, with all the other information there. So there we go. All right. Yep. Cool. I will take notes into that then. With that said, we're basically at the end of the slides. I think here the last one's just an other business slide. Yep. So let's switch over. Do you want to share the slides, Carsten? You can share them inside the Meet Echo interface here.
So I'm wondering how I can do this.
Mine.
So the slides have links on them, so you probably best present them in the browser.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe you can do that because I'm always having trouble with that.
Yep. All right. Let me pull them down now.
Hey, Bron, did we skip over the 1 minute liaison item in the agenda there?
Sorry?
There was a 1 minute liaison item in the agenda.
I don't know.
I can do this in less than 1 minute. Last Wednesday, the IAB met and picked a liaison. The liaison's been selected. It's not me. I'm happy to say, I guess. And but the actual name of the person hasn't been announced. I expect that it should be announced early next week. And as soon as it is, I'll send a note to the list. I think that was less than 60 seconds.
Okay, thank you. You probably have to press the, yeah, thanks. Okay, so I slapped together some really quick slides for this. I was kind of torn between waiting for the mailing list to actually have some discussion I was going to reference in the slides, and so I waited maybe a little bit too long for making some. Yeah, so next slide. Essentially, the current status is, did I send you the wrong drafts? The wrong slides? Oh my God, sorry. Can you check the new slides that I proposed?
Yep, I think there might be a second proposed slides in there. So let me go in and update that now.
Yeah, so I think we're trying to make a record for the meeting with the most technical glitches here.
Yeah, I don't see another set of slides. I think I've got your...
Weird. because I see that.
Slides listed there again,
They should be
and
there.
it's this one. The one in Data Tracker is definitely this, unless it hasn't updated yet.
Well, it's a side product of doing too many things at the
Oh,
same time.
yep.
So
No, they're back now. There you go.
Something is broken in Data Tracker's caching today.
Yep.
I'm getting old versions of things occasionally. So maybe you're a victim of that. That looks better.
It does look better, doesn't it? There you go.
The other ones were the slides for the Wednesday core interim.
All right, carry on.
Yeah, thank you. So the status is that 6 days ago, I took the results of the IETF-112 discussion and updated the draft with what I perceive to be those results. So my first question would be, who actually has read this new version? Can you maybe use the poll tool to elicit that? I'm not a chair, so I cannot use the poll tool.
Sure.
Okay.
So we'll leave it for 30 seconds or so to let everyone find it. And
Yeah.
click
So
on it.
it's much easier to have the following discussion if you actually have read that draft. But I'm going to try to summarize what's in there. But that will be a limited summary if I don't want to read the text. So 4 have read it, 4 have not read it, and I didn't vote. Great. So let's go back to the slides. So what I would like to do, we still have 8 issues open on GitHub. I didn't change anything there. What I would like to do is first look at the 2 pull requests and see whether these are actually going in the right direction. If they don't, then we should focus on fixing these pull requests or these changes that led up to -02. And then we can essentially take the open issues and group them into issues that are now officially out of scope, so we can get to them later. Issues that essentially have been answered by these changes, and some 4 issues that we actually need to work on. And of course, there are more issues. We haven't really started making new issues now, and we had a little bit of a discussion on the mailing list on critical versus elective extensions. So that's my proposal. Next slide. So the really big pull requests, not in terms of number of lines, but in terms of impact on the document, has been pull request 10, which adds text that defines the scope of this draft. And essentially the scope is now limited to extensions that are informational, that add information to an RFC 3339 timestamp, but don't try to override information that is in there. So this is not a statement that we should never do this, but it's a statement that this draft focuses on these informational extensions, and a future recharter might enable the working group to actually add extensions that change the meaning. So for instance, we had talked about calendaring, support floating times, and so on, which would be out of scope by the current text. So this is my interpretation of where we are in the discussion, and of course I would like to open the floor to hear feedback. Neil.
Thanks. Hi. Yeah, I just want to ask whether that means the scope doesn't cover all the cases that the temporal folks from that brought this to us need, because that was my understanding, is they have some that would not be covered by this, and that was, I thought, the original purpose of this group.
That's maybe a question that the temporal people can
Yeah, that's
answer.
I think someone from them could answer here. Yeah.
I can take this, I think. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think our main focus is to get the informational extensions, as are mentioned here, in, and there's definitely the need to standardize the subformats, but it's not as urgent for us, so we're happy to sort of leave that out until we can figure out the best strategy for that. But as long as the extension format is standardized, that's a great start for Temporal. So I like that prioritization of getting this particular RFC, or not RFC maybe, but this particular draft in shape and published as soon as we can, and ship Temporal, and then later on iterate on the subsets. Of course, others can answer also
Although
on their
when you
points of
ship
view.
Temporal, there will be a serialization for all your formats. Well, there'll have to be, I guess. So, like, ones without a time, that are not a timestamp, will still be serialized. They're just, it's not something that's going to have any standard to refer to.
Yes, but
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to confirm. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's where we got to.
So one important observation here is that the way this document is set up, we have a registry where any organization can define extensions. So we don't have to wait for another RFC to define the FUBA extension if that is something that somebody wants to do. And there are organizational issues for getting this extension done in the IETF. So all the current document does is define a registry and define the basic time zone name mechanism, which is, because it uses a different syntax, not phrased as an extension, but clearly has the same semantical structure, just a slightly different syntax. So I think we have a pretty accommodating way by allowing people to register their own extensions.
Excellent. Is there any other discussion on this point? Guess not.
So I think we can go to the next slide. The other result of the IETF-112 discussion that I tried to write up was to simplify the key and namespace handling, and all that actually focuses around that registry that I just talked about. So essentially we have one IANA registry that registers what is called xname on this slide. And again, we have to define the policy. So we could define a restrictive policy for that. We could define a more open policy. That has not yet been decided. And I think that's probably the biggest decision we have to make for that. And apart from that registry, we have the syntax defined, and I think it's important that people look at the syntax. I didn't copy the ABNF here on the slide. Whether that's actually good enough as a generic container mechanism for people to define their extensions in. Yeah, right. So if you go into the pull request and go into files change, yes. Yeah, I think it's most productive to go down to the ABNF. Yeah. Yeah. The maybe you can just click on the file because it's easier to see this as a whole ABNF than as a set of changes.
We can expand it.
Yeah, that works too. Right. So basically, the syntax is on line 324 new, 399 old, and date time extended is a date time. A traditional is the 33, 39 date time, followed by a suffix. And the suffix is a time zone extension followed by 0 or more excuse me, an optional time zone extension followed by 0 or more suffix tags. So the time zone extension looks exactly like it did before. And the suffix is this X name equals value, where the X name can be structured into a namespace and a key within this namespace. And the suffix can also be structured by minus signs within the suffix. So this is currently all alphanumeric. Maybe people need a little bit more syntactic freedom there. So this is one of the things we would need to discuss. But at least this is general enough that it should be able to get extensions by various organizations in there, and allow them to define that structure.
Yeah, so the alpha num restricts down what it can possibly be. That this is the only possible characters in a value.
Yeah, that's maybe a little bit
which restricts you to not quite 64 bits if you were to try and encode something that needs more than that. So this certainly means if we were to try and encode anything that is 8-bit, it would need to be encoded as hexadecimal or as base 32 or something. Yeah, just go ahead, Mike.
What do we actually need namespaces, or is that not going to? What if somebody decides in one namespace to define something that defines a calendar, and somebody in another namespace decides to define something that defines a calendar, but they're slightly different?
So that's, I think, two questions in one. I can try to answer that. On the first hand, we chose this namespace format because we were inspired by the Unicode BCP 47 stuff. So that was definitely an inspiration. Regarding extensions that might conflict with each other, the draft did mention that the extension that came first would take precedence. So something like conflicting time zone annotations, where one might be the Yana time zone name as we have standardized it, and the other may be the Unicode the Unicode time zone ID would be completely valid.
I didn't
At
mean
least within
conflicting
the current.
in one single representation. I mean that some people may choose to use one, some people may choose to use the other, and how do we stop that kind of thing happening other than by simply saying, why don't you just define an attribute in the registry and we'll go with that.
Yeah, that's pretty much the discussion how restrictive the registration policy should be.
Yeah.
So we can go for RFC required, which would mean that there would be some extensive discussion and vetting of an extension, or we could go for specification required. Specification required means somebody has to write up the specification, and a designated expert who is nominated by the ISG will check that specification against a number of items that we would write up in this document. So, for instance, the one of the instructions this RFC could have to the designated expert is not to register conflicting mechanisms.
I mean, the problem with I mean, it's really just sort of reinventing the X- problem is what I see happening. Is the problem there is people in, at least say in the calendaring world, decide, oh, we need to have this property to do something. We can use the X- mechanism and we'll define it. And then, of course, what happens is it goes into production like that. And would be better off not even allowing that and saying, why don't you just define a property and use it and maybe register it provisionally. And then when we know how it works properly, we'll register it fully and we're done. That I mean, there's some value for namespaces for something which is absolutely and definitely internal to an organization, maybe some tracking code that they use. But the trouble is it tends to start to leak into the outside world because they define something like, I don't know, a UID or whatever it happens to be. And before you know it, you've got an unofficial standard out there.
Can you go to my slide number 7? That has the proposed resolution of the X- problem. So the specific X- problem is solved. Is proposed to be solved by having an X- namespace that is limited to closed experiments. So if you use this in the open, then you are in violation of the spec. Of course, you still can do it.
People already are in the calendaring world. I mean, it has something of the same word. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's only. I mean, the X is supposed to stand for experimental.
Yes.
They're not. They've become standard.
Yeah, and there is pretty strong wording in the current draft that would describe such behavior. So that's definitely out. You define X- while you are making your experiment, but at some point you have to stop and do the real thing.
Yeah, the problem is in practice. If you take a look at data that's out there, almost any calendar data from any major vendor is packed with X properties that they've added to do something, and which everyone else is now putting in there to duplicate the functionality that they added.
Yeah,
the problem
this is
is
not covered by the current specification.
Yeah, you're going either way. People are going to do this, and at least the X- allows them to annotate it in a way that means it won't clash with anything real or anything that has gone through the standardization process.
Generally, there's two things. Oh, sorry, there's a queue. I'll go back.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Or John's
John?
first.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'll take myself.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you. You can't hear us either. Oh, you can. No? Yeah, maybe Neil can go first while you fix your audio problem.
Okay, sure. So what I was going to say was this problem comes up every single time because it is a common problem to all any kind of data format and protocol. And there's a key difference of, is it a data format or a protocol? This one's a data format. That makes it harder because you can't negotiate with the other side. When it's protocol, you can do a lot more to make sure that, both sides have to opt into anything new and that kind of thing. You can't do that here. We don't know who's going to be receiving these and where it's going to be used. So generally, the second best option then is you can allow an X- namespace for private experiments, but you also want to make it really easy to standardize stuff, even if it's just registering proper namespace, because as Mike was saying, as soon as someone does something useful and it starts getting out in the wild, everyone else is going to want to implement it as well for interoperability. They're going to have to, and so you might as well have made it easier to standardize properly rather than have everyone use X- forevermore.
Just quickly, a reserved option on that, so that would allow us to say this is reserved by somebody. They intend implementing something in kind of a proper specification, just to help prevent things getting conflicted.
Yeah, I think that's essentially the same thing that Mike proposed with provisional registration. That's definitely a good idea. So I believe that should be added.
Sorry, I don't know if people can hear me now.
Yes.
This business is using two Zooms and a Meet Echo at the same day is a problem. This X business really started with email, and our experience with it has been terrible. There is actually an IETF normative document which says don't do that anymore. I understand all the arguments for it. I think those of us who've been around for a while have all heard them before, but this is just not a good way to go to try to put things in there that are half standard and maybe experimental, but maybe it's not an experiment anymore. And maybe you could do this, but maybe somebody else is going to do this in a different way. It's just not a good thing to try, for whatever that's worth. And I predict that if you take a document into IETF last call, which contains provisions for X- names, you will get trashed. Just personal opinion, I guess.
John, are you proposing that we go more with the registry that allows you to reserve a name for experiments?
I think you have to. The registry is permitted to register a name, indicate it's provisional, indicate when it times out and disappears if you're not going to use it, maybe, or make it permanent, make the definitions better. But relying on a particular piece of syntax like this X- to convey too many things that some of which may not be true by the time somebody sees it just is not workable in the long run.
Yep.
Did you read the text that I put in the document on X-? So I think before you dismiss my text on X-, you maybe should read it.
Which section is it?
Maybe you can just go to the actual draft. That's probably easier.
I'm on the draft, yeah.
Yes.
No, to the formatted draft. Because that has section numbers.
I did look at that, although not in the last hour or two, and the comment stands. I think you can dance around this in lots of ways, but the problems remain.
Yeah. I think the point, as I read, is it doesn't matter what you put in the spec. If you allow namespacing or X dash, people will use it, and they'll use it in ways you don't want them to use it. I think namespacing is just X dash in disguise and has all the same problems. And I think allow provisional registration so people can get in early, and make people go through a proper registration process.
Yeah.
So the question that I wanted to ask, wait, am I on the next on the queue?
Just go ahead, I think.
Okay. But yeah, I think it's clarified at this point. So I wanted to ask if people are against the X dash or just namespacing in general. And it seems that people are against namespacing in general. But I just wanted to clarify that namespacing is not a strong position on the temporal side. So yeah, it's definitely a possibility that we could just include the idea of having flexible namespaces in general and just stick to the two extensions that we had in mind with time zones and calendars, and have an additional registry, not for namespaces, but in this case for extensions.
Yeah, the current text has both. So registering a namespace does not relieve you from registering the actual extension. It only means that you have a prefix that you can define your own extensions under. So you have a way to structure the overall space of names that can be registered. Of course, that's just an embellishment that can be left off, but I think it's a useful embellishment.
I think that the thing is, if an extension is generally useful, it shouldn't be namespaced. It should just be an extension that is defined fully and registered so people can use it. I just see us ending up in a situation where you have two namespaces and two different extensions under those namespaces, which are almost the same or overlap. And people will come at these from different ways, and they'll see one and they'll use that, and other people will see the other and use that. And then we've got both of them out in the wild, but at different times. And the consumers are left to sort out the mess.
Yeah, the way to solve this is to actually give the designated expert instructions how to avoid this mess. Because the namespace doesn't mean that the designated expert is out of the picture.
I just don't see what value the namespace gives us.
Well, for instance, it could start with Microsoft, so you know that the extension has been defined by Microsoft.
That'll be in the RFC with the authors.
Yeah, there's nothing, even if we take all this away, there's nothing stopping you kind of namespacing anyway by calling it Microsoft dash something.
Yeah,
it's not officially a namespace per the.
Yeah, you could just call it Microsoft dash my useful property. It doesn't really add value.
Okay.
So is this the proposal to strip namespaces entirely and just have the name be an item in the registry and you're allowed to use hyphens in it?
I'd prefer that, yeah.
Are
you happy with that, Carsten, as a proposal?
Yeah, the simpler the better.
Cool.
Then I would actually take out the dash and not allow the dash at all. Because that gives the impression there are namespaces when there aren't.
So would you make it not a legal character at all in the value, or still allow
in
it
the key?
In the key. Sorry. Yep. Probably should allow some kind of punctuation in it. Or,
I
I don't know,
think,
maybe just
yeah, I'm sort of inclined to allow punctuation, but we don't drop any mention of namespaces.
Am I audible? Okay, it looks like I'm audible
Yep.
now. I'm sorry, my
Yep.
microphone was not working previously. Yeah, I think like Ujwal had said earlier, the idea of having this mechanism with namespaces is directly inspired by the BCP47 RFC. And um, if there's another system that works better than that, I think we're very happy to entertain that. I think one of the advantages of having the namespaces is that in BCP47, for instance, is that Unicode can decide to add additional keys under its namespace, with a more lightweight process. And I think in the um, in this calendar syntax where we're discussing, I could foresee, for example, there may need to be Unicode may want to add an additional field. I don't exactly know what that would be at this particular case to specify maybe a time calendar system, for example. Like maybe UCA represents the date calendar. Maybe there's also a system for the time calendar. That's been idea that's been brought up before with a lower cost process to add it. I think that probably if we don't have namespacing, we should have a way established to add to a low cost mechanism for proposing and standardizing these keys. And I think that if we did have that process, then I agree that I think that the namespaces are probably not necessary. But I would also um, I think it's also very useful to consult the BCP47 authors on this idea and what has and hasn't worked for them.
Yeah, the registry was intended as a lightweight mechanism to adopt specifications by a different organization.
I think a provisional registry would be that. I mean, I think we probably do need two. Essentially, we need something, or at least mark something as being provisional in the registry. That is, but if it's not provisional, it needs to be fully specified with an RFC.
Yeah, I think John's suggestion was good. Oh, John's in the queue. I would make his own suggestion.
Yeah.
You just said with an RFC as a throwaway. This is a big difference. We can do both kinds of registries. We can do registries with a policy of RFC required, which means we have a lot of process, or we can make registries with a policy of specification required, which means we have a relatively easy process, which is run by a designated expert who gets a little bit of a SAR position, but that designated expert can be guided by statements from the RFC that sets up the registry to only do things that we consider useful here.
Yeah. RFC might have been the wrong term. I try to distinguish between, say, a provisional one which doesn't require much process, and some specification required, which might be another standard organization, I guess.
All right. Do we have more stuff we want to move on with? Should we finish up with this discussion at the moment, or is there more to do here? Obviously, we'll discuss on the mailing list.
Well, as an editor, I have a pretty clear direction in which this is going, and I could still formulate a few alternatives that we can then discuss the next time.
John, did you want to
Yeah, I think what Carson just said is a good path. People should try to keep in mind that in general, the most important criterion for doing any of these things is that you don't end up in a situation where two different people or organizations are using the same string to denote something different. That's where you get chaos, and that's of course the problem that Xdash doesn't solve. How far you want to go into trying to get specifications, trying to encourage specificity, trying to evaluate applications is another question. But with the understanding that if you make it too hard, people will ignore you and do whatever they feel like anyway. But but the main thing is to make absolutely certain, and provisional registries, which are very lightweight, can be a way of doing it that you don't, if you can at all avoid it, end up with two people accidentally using the same string to denote two different things. Everything else is everything else turns out to be details. Thank you.
Cool. All right. We were, I think, back a few slides here, weren't we?
Yeah, this one. So I think we just resolved to radically simplify this, getting rid of the namespaces, having a registry that allows provisional registration, and we have to write up the details of that. There are lots of devils in that detail. And we can look at alternative policies like RFC required or specification required. And I think I understand what the working group wants well enough that I can make reasonable proposals there.
Cool.
And on John's chat comment pointing to the media type registry, of course, that is a pretty good example for how you actually can herd the cats here. So I think we can learn a lot from that, and we should. So media types have provisional registrations, and they also have vendor trees, which we may or may not want to adopt. Probably not. And I think we can learn a lot from that. So I second the recommendation of reading that RFC. Good. So next, open issues. Slide 6, please. So there are 3 open issues that essentially are out of scope now, which is adding timescales, adding floating time mechanism, and adding a way a time zone name can override the time zone offset. So all 3 are out of scope with the SEDATE charter, which doesn't mean that when we actually come to the place where we actually define extensions like that, it doesn't mean we cannot use the syntax we defined in this document. We just cannot define these specific extensions just yet. So my assumption would be all 3 actually would go into extensions. Yeah, we have to discuss for the floating time. We might want to discuss whether we want to have a way to make sure this doesn't look like a RFC 339 date. So maybe there's a little bit more than an extension, but we probably only can do this properly once we are chartered to do so.
All right. I think I'm happy with that. Does anyone else want to discuss this?
So this is not going to stop me from writing a draft that has those 3 extensions in it, but it's not something the working group can work on at this point in time.
Yep.
Okay, slide 7. We just had that, slide 8. yeah, so we have 3 open issues, and since we only have 5 minutes, I probably only can remind people of that. First of all, we need a name for that baby. Yeah, we don't want to come up with names in this meeting, but please, people, go home and think about a name. Extended RFC 3339 timestamps is not the name. Second, I think we need at least one extension actually defined in the document so we can show how to do that. I think, I don't know what that extension would be, but if anyone has an idea for something that's sufficiently well understood that we could define that extension right in that current document, that would be a useful thing to have.
I was going to say floating time, but then
yeah, so floating time is not going to be it. The third item is there are a number of issues about the stability of TZDB names, and I think the issue goes a little bit to the backseat once we no longer try to override offsets with names. So maybe we can simply ignore that issue for the moment. But I think we at some point we will have to develop a position on that. And finally, the question that came up was whether this is actually a specification that users type in or look at, or is it a specification that programs actually use? And that, of course, interacts with questions like what is the exact syntax for a value? So if we want to enable UTF-8 usage in the values, then we probably have to work on that much more than if we can say, oh, this is all for programs anyway, so it can simply be ASCII and be done with it. So last slide. What's first?
Yeah, I just have a quick feedback on that. Certainly on the temporal side, we have been assuming from the get-go that this is for programs, and that there's sort of separate software for parsing of human readable values, separate software for displaying localized human readable values. And so the primary consumers we've anticipated for this format are software, and then obviously developers in the prospect of debugging or logging or whatnot. But it's not viewed as an end user facing format.
That's very good input.
And then for the extension, we would propose the calendar extension if we need one, because we want to add that. So,
yep.
And then there's one more open issue that I just found while I was reading the spec just now, is that the ABNF that we have does not allow, for the time zone extension, does not allow numeric offset time zones, which is something that java.time supports. And because that's the prior art for this format, we'd like to add that to the ABNF. And I just filed an issue in GitHub with some suggested.
Thank you. Very good. So we have 1 minute to look at the last slide. Yeah, so I came up with a quick proposal how to do elective versus critical extensions. And for instance, we could simply replace the equals sign by something like a exclamation mark or an exclamation mark equal sign or whatever. Syntax can come later to say that an extension really needs to be understood for the string to make sense.
Yeah, I mean, we can put it in the registry, but the problem is that the parser is not looking in the registry first to see how to parse things. So there does need to be something in here that just says, you need to know what this means.
Yeah, it's an
I'm not
instruction for the
particularly
case that the parser doesn't know the extension. So putting anything about the extension in the registry is not solving any problem. I agree. Neil.
Yeah, I think changing the syntax within the extension like that is likely to cause issues because it won't happen very often, and so people will not read the spec, code something that just presumes it's always an equals, and that will just break if it's different, even if they actually supported it. I would prefer to keep things simpler. I think either we don't need it, yeah, it's just like you say in the spec if this is required, so in the registry, and look, if apps don't understand it, they're going to have problems regardless of what you do. The other option is you have an extension that explicitly means all of these extensions must be fully understood for you to process this. Like, so, Miracle standard is UCA equals Hebrew and then square brackets required, or status equals required or something, close square brackets. You see what I mean?
Yeah, so this is syntax. We can discuss syntax on the mailing list, but the question should we actually expend effort for coming up with a elective versus critical mechanism?
I suspect it won't actually help in practice, but I might be wrong if others disagree.
So the whole point of including a critical extension mechanism is to prevent false interoperability. So if it breaks, that's exactly what we want.
That's assuming people pay attention to that.
Well, they have to write something in their parsers.
Yeah, that's why it needs to be in the base spec, so that people know if their interoperability is not there.
I put the third example here. This is not the general invitation to slap exclamation marks over the syntax. There's one specific place after an extension name where you would say this extension is critical, and nothing else.
Yeah, it's almost like namespacing, isn't it?
No, it's the same namespace. So you could use the same extension both as elective and as critical. Which the example
should probably put in the registry whether that's something you can do or not.
Yeah, I mean, my concern with this one is that oftentimes the people creating strings are different from the people interpreting strings, and that a lot of times they won't know ahead of time how it's going to get used, and so I would. It just feels like there's two ends that can screw up, and if either one of them screws up, then it breaks, and it breaks in unpredictable ways. So this feels like a harder one, and rather like either it seems like it might be simpler to say an extension is either required or optional, and the receiver can reject it if it's not a required thing, but like the same extension being sometimes required and sometimes optional feels like it's
that's as I said in the email, that's not my proposal. An extension is one or the other, but the parser needs to be able to recognize whether it's a required one or not, even if it doesn't know it, so it can know whether to ignore it.
Yeah, if you're going to try to make this distinction, and this is part of my somewhat cynical comment in the email, then it cannot be on a per registration basis. It needs to be global, and it needs to be absolutely clear and in your face rather than something which depends on, well, for example, looking at the slide on a single character clue in syntax, because not only will people ignore it, but computers will ignore it.
Yep. I like the leading exclamation mark.
Okay.
You can't put it on the time zone because that time zone's a Java compatibility thing. So that example I would definitely say shouldn't be there. But you could register something that starts with an exclamation mark, and that means must be required, must be understood.
And I can always register two extensions. One has an exclamation mark and one doesn't. So I can get the elective versus critical option in there anyway.
Into is that a lot of people building parsers will, say, oh, well, all I care about is the time zone and the offset, and so I'm just going to write my parser that way. And then somebody sends it with an exclamation point extension, and the parser just ignores it. So I realize that wouldn't be compatible with the spec, but it seems like
that's what goes back to what Bron said, that it should be in the base spec, not part of the registry. That you simply say, if it has an explanation or something, if it has this flag, whatever it is, you whatever it is, you have to process it, and if you can't, then you fail.
Yeah, I mean, one other way to address that problem would be to essentially break the format in some other way, such that any backwards compatible parser would fail. So like literally there could be an exclamation point at the beginning of the entire string that would say, hey, this is a string that, you need to pay attention to.
As far as I can tell, every vendor is trying to straighten out people's broken syntax. So I don't think you'd be able to do that.
It's a tough problem.
They try to helpfully correct it.
I think we have to do a time check.
Okay.
No, you don't. We have another 20 minutes. I scheduled this for 90 minutes this time.
Okay. The data tracker doesn't know that, but we can pretend we didn't notice.
Maybe I got the timestamp wrong.
Yeah.
So long as Meteco doesn't kick us out, right?
It used to, but I don't think it does any longer.
We can obviously we'll have to discuss this on the list, regardless, and we've already started that. Do we have any other business we want to cover today?
So when do we meet the next time?
Yeah, I was going to just ask that question. So it seems like there's further discussion that needs to take place on the list. I get that. And I think we made, seems to me anyway, that made some really good progress here today. One of the things that we talked about at IETF-112 was whether or not to do a second interim in January. And I think Ron and I will go away and see how much progress gets made here in the next few weeks. I mean, that'll be very difficult. But possibly having Karsten come up with a rev on the draft is the signal to have another interim meeting. So I think rather than make that decision now, the right way to go about that is to see whether or not we can get a new draft out the door sometime in January and see if Karsten is up for that. And also see how the discussion on the mailing list goes. And then I think Bron and I would be happy to do the usual doodle poll and all the administrative stuff. I'm certainly happy to take care of that. So that would be my suggestion of a way forward. Without consulting my co-chair, I did that.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, so my
right.
objective would be to have a draft under the Christmas tree, and then you can read it with all the time you have between the years, and we can do a doodle then.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So I think what we'll do is we'll encourage further conversations on the list. I noted a couple issues that I should probably talk to Brian about. And then if we do have a new draft under the Christmas tree or ready for a dramatic reading at somebody's New Year's party, that'd be great. And yeah, well, some of us know how to have fun. I think then an interim in January would be great, because I would feel like, and this is a really naive point of view, I would feel like we're making pretty good progress here, and can start thinking about the timetable for when this would be ready for finishing up and last call and all the administrative stuff that goes on at the end. And then in January, a conversation can take place about whether or not we have any interest in rechartering. But I think all of those conversations should go on in the mailing list. So.
I have one quick question. So regarding namespaces, and will the string format of the calendar annotation change at all as a result of that discussion? Like, is it still U-CA equals, or should it be something else? Because that will actually affect us on the temporal side, and if we are going to change it, we'd love to be able to change it sooner rather than later.
One thing we said that we were going to get rid of the dash, but then there were other people who wanted to have some structure in that name. So maybe we are not getting rid of the dash. If you are saying that life is easier for you if you have the dash, then maybe we should just make it into a character you can use, like you can use an A or a Z.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest is obviously don't change anything. And so we're happy with the current format. If the format's going to change, we would just like to know sooner rather than later. And I guess while I'm talking, should I file a PR for that ABNF for the Java compatibility for
Yes,
the
please.
time zone offset? Okay, sounds good.
Excellent. Does anybody have any other business?
Hello, do you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I keep hearing a lot of support from people about the other draft that we were talking about for the subformats for representing subsets of instance, which aren't necessarily instance. Do we want to discuss next steps on that?
Right now? Probably after recharter. Let's get this one through. I don't know. Does it?
Well, we probably want to talk with Mark. I think you are trying to say something.
Go ahead.
I think we probably need to popularize the idea that we are going for a charter at some point with the people in the ISG, in particular those that did see a problem there, so we understand the boundaries of the space. We can go there.
One question that I had, and I'm not sure if this has been answered before, but are we sure that this definitely doesn't fall under the current charter of Calext?
I guess this is me, right? Calext is looking to recharter. We could definitely bring this under the charter of Calext. So the question then is, do we want to, or do we want to keep a separate group? Calext's planned recharter is to do maintenance of all the related formats, and so adding this to Calext's charter instead would definitely be possible. The question is more whether there are many people who are interested in this and not interested in the rest of what Calext is doing, because that's the main reason to keep things separate.
Yeah, sure. Another thing is that one of the big reasons why some of this work was initially proposed in Calex was that we were under the impression that the current charter of Calex also, allows us to work on some of these things. So that was more of my question.
I would be quite happy to bring this to Calext after we've done this initial document.
I'm strongly aligned to that also. I think bringing this document to publication is my personal biggest priority, and then we can talk about that in more detail. So yeah, thanks.
All right, last call for any other business. Okay, so let me say thanks to everybody, especially people who had to attend at unusual times. And I think we have a plan moving forward.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
All right,
you.
I think we're done.
Good progress.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great rest of day / evening, whatever. Cheers.